The Sadness is a movie about the very sad effects of flu season in Taiwan and what happens when the Chinese government sends over their chemically engineered bats to try and reclaim the country as their own, because apparently they need an even bigger population. Written, directed and edited by Canadian Rob Jabaz, in his directorial debut, he really decided to put his all into this movie and create perhaps the most wholesome and family-focused piece of entertainment that the world has ever seen. The sadness begins in extreme sadness due to the unfortunate side effects of being in Taiwan, as we then see a man and a woman laying in bed next to each other, Jim and Kat, which definitely sound like very real Taiwanese names to me. After waking up and being a little bit of a bum because he's unemployed and doesn't have anything else to do, Jim takes a look at his phone to see a video of two people discussing something known as the Alvin virus and the possibility of it mutating into something completely catastrophic. Something which doesn't seem to bother Jim all that much, due to him thinking that Alvin and the Chipmunks is overrated anyway. Jim then walks out onto his balcony to see an elderly woman taking in some of that lovely Taiwanese morning sun, with that being the only thing she's taking in due to the extreme dementia that's riddling her brain. He then has a conversation with his neighbour Mr. Lin as he walks out onto the balcony with a cold, and they discuss the Alvin virus, but Mr. Lin discredits it as nothing more than a hoax to destroy the country's economy or something, as much like birds, it's a government hoax to control the people. Jim, deciding that he better go do something useful, takes Kat to the train station on his scooter, while passing a police officer struggling to restrain a rather overexcited civilian, while a bloodied body is covered from head to toe on a gurney because he was feeling a little bit chilly. After kissing Kat and dropping her off to get her train, because screw driving her all the way there, he heads home to conduct the rigorous task of being unemployed. But with a hard day's work ahead of him, he needs to fuel himself, so he decides to stop to get a coffee, when suddenly that strange old lady from the rooftop walks in behind him. Unsettled by the sight of old people, a customer decides to check on the old lady due to believing that old people don't actually contain free will, with her turning to face the man with a sinister grin before deciding to share some of her saliva and a little bit of her breakfast with him by politely positioning it all over his face. And wanting to demonstrate the dangers of fast food to the youth, she then grabs the cook before picking up the deep frying oil and pouring it all over his face before tearing the skin from his bone because she's going to keep it for herself. The man, who was just given the impromptu old person shower, then suddenly decides to start stabbing his friend who he was just sitting with because getting spat on by an old person is embarrassing. The old woman then starts to slowly approach Jim, but with the Taiwanese having something against the elderly, she's suddenly hit by a speeding car that also happens to be completely silent. Checking on the driver, Jim discovers that the man seems to be extremely happy with the modern art he's just created on the sidewalk, as a woman above them decides to test if gravity is indeed real or not, when suddenly a group of people smiling from ear to ear emerge from the restaurant and start running towards Jim to share some of their joy. And unfortunately for Jim, as he runs through the absolute carnage, his feet are going to be completely soaking wet from the blood due to not wearing today's sponsor's shoes, Vessi. Unlike the people who are currently chasing Jim, while wearing Vessi, you'll feel the love in every step you take, thanks to their stylish, everyday versatility, comfort, and ability to keep your feet bone dry, which can't be said about the other people's bones in this movie, who are going to be extremely wet. Vessis ensure that slight annoyances like rain, snow, or a rabid pandemic won't stop you from enjoying the outdoors thanks to their waterproof technology and all-day comfort, so while the world is erupting in chaos around you, you'll be enjoying your stress-free walk. Not only are you going to be comfortable, dry, and absolutely beautiful in these shoes, but you can also be happy in the fact that you're supporting a sustainable company that uses eco-friendly materials as a commitment to future forward goals. Future forward goals meaning actually having a planet to inhabit. Standing out from the other brands due to their waterproofing technology and comfort due to their selection, Vessi is our number one pick when leaving the house due to living in a place where the weather is less predictable than me after forgetting to take my anti-anxiety medication. So if you want something that's sleek, stylish, waterproof, and built to last, take your step toward a better you with Vessi and start strong with Vessi shoes at vessi.com/bigwill to embrace every rainy day and enjoy an instant 15% off your first purchase at checkout.
You can even do this in them.
Wait there. Stay there. The crazed group is smiling and laughing as they sprint after him, but Jim manages to make it back to his apartment before they can get to him, where he then begins trying to call Kat. but considering that she's in fact a cat and not a human, she's unable to answer the call. Mr. Lin, thinking that it would be a great idea to sneak in and give Jim a surprise neck rub from behind, suddenly appears wielding a pair of garden shears where he chops off 2 of Jim's fingers. Thinking that they look kind of tasty actually, he picks them up and begins eating them before Jim smashes him over the head with a toaster because how dare you put your fingers in my mouth. Realizing that he needs to make his way to Cat, Jim leaves the relative safety of his apartment and makes his way out onto the street as he can hear the maniacal laughs of the infected before coming across a group of them pinning a man to the floor and breaking his arm for their own sadistic enjoyment. They turned him into a Rice Krispie with the way his bones snapped, crackled and popped. Managing to retrieve his scooter from outside of the restaurant, while simultaneously gathering the attention of all the infected nearby, we then see Kat sitting and reading a book on a crowded train. Things still seem to be normal here, so normal in fact that a man sits down next to her and proceeds to continuously try to talk to her, despite her making it apparently obvious that she'd rather just read her book alone in peace, with that being something which is kind of difficult to do when you've got a random stranger in your ear telling you how beautiful you are, something which I'm sure all you viewers can relate to, due to each and every one of you being absolutely gorgeous. He then proceeds to get upset at her after she tells him to leave her alone, when suddenly a different man on the train sheds a tear because someone just farted in an enclosed space, before pulling out a pocket knife and calmly planting it into the backs of multiple passengers that surround him. He begins indiscriminately thrusting it into other people on the train, causing everyone around him to smell of pennies as blood squirts from these people's brand new orifices. After he's taken to the ground, he then smiles and asks if he's managed to break the record, when suddenly another man begins attacking a woman with his keys due to him confusing her for a locked door. Chaos completely erupts on the enclosed train as the virus begins rapidly spreading, causing people to become extremely violent in over-the-top and sadistic ways, with the man who got upset at Kat earlier returning to stab the tip of his umbrella into a woman's eye socket as she sits next to Kat. People's eyes are gouged out, their flesh is consumed, and their internal organs defy all odds as they become external organs. Kat drops her phone while leaving the train as she runs away with the woman who just had the tip of her brain itched. The other woman is named Molly, and they're being pursued by the man who really doesn't understand how to use an umbrella properly. They then run into someone who doesn't seem to be aware of what's going on yet, and after telling him that they've been attacked, he tries to help them. But with the umbrella man feeling slightly peckish, he latches onto the man's face and bites off his nose, before retrieving a rather conveniently placed fire axe and hacking this good Samaritan into tiny little pieces, with the moral of the story being, mind your own business. The pair manage to make it to the end of the tunnel as the umbrella man is too busy studying human anatomy, when suddenly a man standing at the end spots them and decides to lock them in because women are gross and smelly. They just about manage to make it through the tunnel in time before the shutters close behind them, and Molly punches the man in the face due to him having an incredibly punchable face. Heading back to Jim, we then see as he passes a dead schoolgirl on the street before coming across a baby stroller full of what appears to be squished meatballs. Human meatballs. After passing dozens of bodies as they litter the streets, he then finds a trouserless man violating a woman's corpse before proceeding to speed away as fast as possible as the man switches his attention to Jim and begins sprinting after him with his butt cheeks flapping about in the wind. After managing to get away from the overly excited Asian man, Jim eventually stops at the side of the road to take a look at his hand, as for the first time he's able to give it any attention since he lost the ability to count to 10. After taping it up and finding a sickle that he can use to defend himself, he then sees a group of teenagers beating up a restrained man with baseball bats as they test the denseness of the human skull. They then decide to do something a little bit more fun and wrap barbed wire around a pole before running the man's dangly parts directly into it. And not one to miss the opportunity to beat up a bunch of children for fun, Jim approaches them and kicks one of them so hard in the chest that he spits blood out of his mouth before taking the bat from another and hitting him in the head with it, resulting in the boys running away. And after Jim goes to check on the critically injured man, he's shocked to learn that the man is actually infected too, as he was enjoying everything that was happening to him because he's one of those really strange weird people. Kim, Molly and the security guard make it to a nearby hospital, and after Molly is taken away for an unfortunate case of pink eye, a broadcast plays over the TV saying that 4.5 million people are infected, and that number is rising. The military leader giving the broadcast then begins to profusely sweat due to not being a good public speaker, and after shedding a tear, opens his eyes to reveal that he's infected too. He grabs the president, who is rather conveniently standing right next to him, and pulls a grenade out of his pocket and forces it into the president's mouth, completely blowing his mind on live TV for the whole world to see. The survivors in the hospital then begin arguing and fighting among themselves, because the world absolutely needs some more of that right now, when suddenly Kat looks to see Umbrella Man standing on the opposite side of the glass door. After taking the security security guard's phone, she locks herself out of the room as the umbrella man, now wielding a rather funny looking umbrella, smashes his way into the hospital, allowing the ravenous horde to follow behind and get a little freaky with the occupants. Umbrella Man comes across Molly sitting in a wheelchair and removes her eye patch to admire his handiwork. Apparently, that gets him feeling some kind of way, as he then proceeds to take off his trousers and do unspeakable acts, as that's definitely the wrong hole. Using her newly acquired and definitely not stolen phone, Kat's able to text Jim to tell him where she is, causing him to call the number, with him telling her to hide as he's still trying to make his way to her, but just doesn't feel like rushing. And after hanging up, Jim realizes that he shouldn't have taken those edibles earlier, as he then watches as a mannequin head comes to life and starts licking the air, as a tear begins to roll down his face, just like it did to all those other infected people. Crying is for babies, and because of that, he's going to turn. And back at the hospital, the now phoneless security guard watches as a group of naked infected people covered in blood go at it before running away from the zombie G. After witnessing unspeakable horrors, naked people, the security guard then comes across Molly, as apparently she's a little bit hungry. He watches as she consumes human remains, before he's then grabbed and held to the floor by the naked group, as the now infected Molly retrieves a medical saw and decides to see if there's anything inside of him, like a funny Taiwanese Kinder Surprise. Kat, then spotted by the umbrella man, after running away, can hear him talk about the horrific things that he did to Molly, while explaining the horrific things that he's going to do to her. But not wanting to hear him mansplain about this or that, she sprays him in the face with a fire extinguisher, before using it to turn his skull into a slightly flatter shape. After making sure that the umbrella man will never wield another umbrella again, suddenly a sealed door opens as she enters a room containing a man in a protective suit. He doesn't want to get any of her girl cuties on him. It's a scientist who's been running experiments. He pulls out a gun and forces her to handcuff herself due to not knowing how to act around women, and makes her take a chemical disinfection shower. After coming to the conclusion that she must be immune because she hasn't shown any signs, he decides to uncuff her. It's the man who Jim saw on his phone at the beginning of the day, talking about the dangers of the Alvin and the Chipmunk virus that would give everyone obnoxiously high-pitched voices as they'd be overcome with the extreme and sudden urge to sing pop songs. After being given some fresh scrubs, Kat then goes to put her dirty clothes in a biohazard waste bag before discovering that's actually where babies come from, as there's a crying one inside, causing the scientist to quickly inject her with something and handcuff her again, as apparently he's incredibly indecisive. He explains that he wanted to run blood tests on her to check if she was truly immune, but after she just discovered his secret baby bin, he realized she'd be less likely to cooperate, so decided that he'd skip straight to the point and inject her with a strain of the virus to see if she will turn. If she doesn't turn, then he can use her to create a vaccine, and they can both leave in a government helicopter that's currently on its way to get him. He explains that when he arrived in the hospital, the staff had already fled, leaving behind 8 newborns. He was going to quickly ensure that they wouldn't meet their end by the hands of the sadistic infected, but realized that he had an opportunity. The opportunity to infect them all like he did to Kat, to see if any of them were immune, with none of them being in fact immune. Jim then arrives at the hospital just as the scientist realizes the Kat must be immune due to not turning yet, so hearing the helicopter, he gets Kat and they start making their way to the roof. But as soon as the scientist steps foot outside of the sealed room, he's immediately made a foot shorter as someone chops his off, and another pukes directly into his open wound. After dealing with them using his 3D printed gun, Jim suddenly appears at the end of the corridor, but by this point, he's completely infected. The scientist fires at Jim, hitting him in the neck, followed by the gun then exploding in his hand, giving Jim the opportunity to repay him the favor in the neck by planting the sickle there. And during the commotion, Kat was able to lock her side on the other side of the gate that heads to the roof. She listens to Jim on the other side of the gate as he tells her from the bottom of his heart all of the vile and disgusting things that he'd like to do to her, with her eventually responding to him by breaking out in laughter, as the scientist was wrong. She's turned too, or just has a really weird sense of humor. Heading up the stairs to the helicopter that's now arrived, we then see her open the door, followed by the sound of gunshots, as we see Jim presumably bleeding out while looking far too happy about it, with the movie then coming to an end. Before this video finishes, I'd just like to give a massive shout out and a big thank you to all of the YouTube members and patrons, the people who go out of their way every month to continue to support the channel, something which I'm greatly appreciative of. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or a patron yourself, not only are you just generally being a great help, but you also get access to a few little perks, like being able to join the private Discord server, where you can then get links to uncensored versions of all videos going forwards, which is probably going to be like 90% of this video. So starting off with this week's new YouTube signups, a massive thank you to Harvey Lazada, Slub45, Zane Munro, B, Luca Guarnieri, Impact, Di Shipton, Pastor Herrera, Dandan, Bootant, Robert Sibley, Mr. Smiles, Lilo, Grimmers89, The Last Final Girl on the Left, 1512, Ashen Mutant, Sarthak Dash, Rashon Mont, Hoven Carmuse, Seeker, Reviz, Davis4797, Bruce Johnson, Ungood, Don Comiu, Malik, Jared Anderson, Tyler Wild, Div Master, Mai, Justin Brandt, Michael Mutters, Joshua Grayling, Bugsy04, Motto Jetsetters, Zaza Lord, and Splurger Burger. Now making my way over to this week's new Patreon signups, a massive thank you to Peach, Ash Photography, Shay Was Here, Farah Lynn, Joseph Ogle, Stripsack Mac, Zeppo, Toby Byers, David Watson, Bard Matt, Stefan Vogues, Lassie Congo, Nick, Cozy, Taylord, Grog, Leslie Thomas, Case, Infinite, Andre, Memoir of a Daydream, Mika Lovely, That Guy on Quack, Jack Nessel, Grimmers89, Joey Miller, Tristan Crosby, Diego Gruner, Big T, J Rob, Stephen Flores, Dara Kelly, Venator1996, Sean, Yatta, Rollout123, Vod, Eggman, Stephen Bother, Ira B, Asoata, Jonathan Bolton, Jake Weed, Danny Rose, Tony Shaw, Zachary Husky, David J. Thompson, John West, Petso, Dreamy, Enyo, Unlimited Atom, Gabe Hawk, Astra, Dead Silent 2121, Jordan Thompson, TR, Johnny Garrett, and Colin. So once again, a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.